Ashland, Oregon, situated in the foothills of the Siskiyou Mountains, experienced rapid suburban growth throughout the 2000s as professionals sought small-town living within commuting distance of larger cities. By 2022, residential developments extended into once untouched forest edges where manicured lawns met dense woodland. This expansion into traditional wildlife corridors created conditions where encounters between suburban families and large predators became increasingly common. The Johnson family had purchased their 4-bedroom home 3 years earlier, deliberately choosing a property that bordered preserved forest. Sarah Johnson, a 34-year-old marketing manager, appreciated the privacy and natural beauty that the wooded setting offered. Her husband, Mark, a 36-year-old civil engineer, had added outdoor lighting and a spacious deck designed for entertaining, with views stretching toward the mountains. Their annual summer barbecue soon became a neighborhood tradition, drawing friends and colleagues for food, drinks, and conversation. This year's event brought together nearly 20 adults and a dozen children, filling the yard with a festive atmosphere that lasted well into the evening. For the Johnsons, the gathering represented both a welcome break from daily pressures and a chance to deepen bonds within their community. On July 14th, guests began arriving around 6 o'clock as temperatures dropped from the day's summer heat. Mark spent the afternoon preparing his signature barbecue sauce and marinating meats, while Sarah coordinated side dishes and beverages. Children from several families turned the adjacent woods into their playground, organizing elaborate games of tag and hide-and-seek. As twilight fell, sparklers were handed out, and the children dashed across the yard, leaving trails of light against the backdrop of the darkening forest. Adults gathered near the deck's outdoor speakers, laughing and trading stories while savoring grilled food and cold drinks. The evening seemed to embody everything that had made the family's move from the city worthwhile. The peace broke suddenly when a massive black bear emerged from the trees behind the Johnsons' home. Adult males could weigh over 140 kilograms, and despite their name, their coats often ranged from deep brown to cinnamon shades. This animal appeared healthy and well-fed, evidence of a successful summer of foraging. Wildlife officials later concluded it had likely been passing through the neighborhood for weeks, encouraged by unsecured trash containers and pet food left outdoors. The concentrated aroma of grilled meat and abundant leftovers had proven irresistible, drawing the animal closer to people than usual. The bear crashed into the backyard, trampling decorative landscaping and scattering lawn furniture. Guests reacted in panic, racing toward the house in a rush of confusion. Children dropped sparklers, their light trails disappearing into the grass, while adults tried to shepherd everyone inside. The transformation from celebration to chaos happened in seconds. Sarah directed the younger children toward the sliding doors, urging them to move quickly while trying to remain calm. Several children became separated from their parents in the confusion, heightening the urgency. Her voice carried determination, even as fear pressed against her composure. Meanwhile, the bear reached the picnic table, where burgers, hot dogs, and side dishes still sat in serving bowls. With powerful swipes of its claws, it sent plates clattering and food scattering across the deck. Though the animal focused primarily on the meal, its sheer size and unpredictable movements made its presence terrifying for those nearby. Mark grabbed a push broom from outdoor storage and stepped forward, attempting to drive the animal back. He made loud noises and tried to appear larger, methods often recommended during black bear encounters. Yet his efforts were weighed down by fear for his guests' safety and uncertainty about the bear's reactions. The animal responded with a quick strike of its paw, knocking Mark against the deck railing. Pain shot through his ribs as claw marks tore into his forearm. Blood spread through his sleeve, but adrenaline pushed him to keep moving, determined to distract the bear long enough for others to reach safety. Across the fence line, a neighbor's German shepherd erupted into furious barking. The sound drew the bear's attention away from the food, momentarily confusing it. This distraction provided precious seconds for the last of the guests to get inside. After several tense minutes, the bear withdrew, retreating into the dark cover of the forest. Mark remained on the deck, scanning the tree line for signs of a return. His arm throbbed, but he focused on ensuring the danger had truly passed before stepping inside. Within the house, shaken guests gradually calmed as Sarah tended to her husband's injuries. Emergency services were called, and medical personnel later treated Mark's claw wounds, cleaning and bandaging them. His injuries, though painful, proved less severe than feared. Sarah, who had been scratched during the rush indoors, required no treatment beyond basic first aid. What began as a joyful neighborhood gathering ended as a terrifying confrontation with wildlife. The event became a frequent subject of discussion in the community, serving as both a warning and a lesson. Residents took greater care with garbage storage and outdoor food, recognizing the role human behavior played in drawing predators closer. For the Johnson family, the night left behind more than memories of fear. It underscored the delicate boundary between suburban expansion and the natural world that had long existed beyond the forest edge. The remote Arctic research settlement situated on the Svalbard archipelago stood among the northernmost permanent scientific communities on Earth by 2014. Located at nearly 79 degrees north latitude, the settlement supported roughly 30 year-round residents who maintained research stations focused on climate, biology, and environmental monitoring. Life in this community was shaped by extreme isolation, unrelenting cold, and the constant awareness that polar bears could appear at any time. Safety protocols required residents to remain vigilant, and armed guards were mandatory whenever anyone stepped beyond designated safe zones. In such a harsh environment, moments of joy were treasured. The settlement's annual winter festival had become a vital tradition, giving residents something to anticipate during the oppressive months of polar night. Preparations began weeks in advance, with neighbors planning displays of lights, traditional foods, and cultural performances. These events lifted morale, helping people endure the endless darkness and psychological strain of Arctic living. For a brief time each winter, survival gave way to celebration. Among those preparing for the 2014 festival were Lars Nielsen, a 42-year-old meteorologist from southern Norway, and Erik Johansson, a 37-year-old logistics coordinator. Lars had lived in the settlement nearly 5 years, maintaining weather stations and collecting atmospheric data essential to global climate studies. His work demanded precision, patience, and resilience in the face of conditions that would send most people fleeing for warmer latitudes. Erik, on the other hand, had arrived 3 years earlier. His role was indispensable, managing deliveries, overseeing equipment, and ensuring that vital supplies reached the community despite the treacherous Arctic shipping routes. Both men had earned reputations for reliability and became anchors in the small settlement's social fabric. On January 15th, the two men worked late into the night as final preparations continued. Outside, the weather turned volatile. Arctic storms were infamous for developing suddenly, and what began as light snowfall soon intensified. Forecasts had predicted only moderate accumulation, but by evening the wind howled at speeds far greater than anticipated. Snow slashed through the air in blinding sheets, and visibility began collapsing by the hour. Lars braved the storm to secure decorative lanterns along the main walkway. Each lantern was designed to endure gusting winds without becoming a fire hazard. These lights symbolized months of planning, their colors intended to break the oppressive darkness that consumed the settlement during the long winter. Every placement required careful work, and each trip outside was timed to avoid frostbite. He would dash into the cold, adjust the lanterns, and return to warmth before venturing out again. Meanwhile, Erik concentrated on the food supplies. He stacked crates of preserved fish beside the communal smokehouse, where traditional preparation methods would transform them into celebratory dishes. The salted cod had been imported from the mainland at considerable expense and represented one of the festival's most anticipated delicacies. Handling the cargo in sub-zero temperatures demanded strength, focus, and endurance. Yet Erik worked methodically, knowing how important these supplies were to morale. As midnight approached, the storm reached full strength, Winds roared at near hurricane force, driving snow horizontally until the settlement seemed swallowed in a blinding white void. Both men knew they should retreat indoors immediately, but the storm had trapped them in an exposed position. Arctic training emphasized the mortal risk of disorientation. Even short distances between buildings could prove fatal in whiteout conditions. It was within this chaos that the danger appeared. Out of the swirling snow came a massive polar bear, its thick white fur making it nearly invisible until it was frighteningly close. Adult males could weigh more than 450 kilograms, and this one embodied the species' terrifying presence. The great predator's size, power, and hunger left no question of the threat it posed. Shifting ice conditions had driven polar bears inland with increasing frequency. Climate change was eroding the sea ice they relied upon to hunt seals, forcing them closer to human settlements in search of food. The scent of preserved fish and the activity surrounding the festival had likely lured the animal toward the heart of the community. To encounter such a predator in the middle of a violent storm was a nightmare scenario. The bear lumbered into the preparation area, paws crushing deep tracks in the snow. Its attention fixed immediately on the stacked crates. Driven by hunger, it advanced with single-minded determination. Eric's hard work was undone in moments as the bear tore through wooden containers, scattering frozen fish across the ground with terrifying ease. Splinters flew in the storm wind as the predator swiped and clawed, its strength obliterating everything in its path. Lars reacted first. From an emergency kit, he pulled a flare gun, hoping the combination of noise and light would frighten the intruder. The red flare streaked into the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the snow-laden ground. For an instant, the predator was illuminated in full, an enormous figure dwarfed by nothing. Yet the bear pressed forward, unfazed by the display. Eric, armed with only a metal pole from the smokehouse equipment, attempted to stand his ground. He swung desperately, striking at the animal's massive head and shoulders. But the polar bear's strength and reach rendered his defense useless. With one swipe, its claws ripped through the pole and sent Eric staggering backward. Blood quickly soaked the snow as deep gashes opened across his legs. Lars's attempt at intervention ended no better. The bear struck him with a single devastating blow, hurling his body into a snowdrift. Pain exploded through his ribs and chest, while the freezing cold immediately compounded his injuries. His heavy protective clothing was shredded, and blood began seeping through layers of fabric. He fought to remain conscious as the blizzard raged around him. Eric continued to struggle, but another violent strike knocked him flat against the ice. He slid across the ground, leaving a streak that the storm winds soon concealed. The predator, relentless and hungry, continued to paw through the scattered fish, but its aggression toward the men had already inflicted devastating consequences. By the time emergency responders reached the site, summoned by perimeter alarms that activated automatically when the bear breached restricted zones, the scene was catastrophic. Lars had succumbed to a combination of massive trauma and rapid hypothermia before aid could arrive. Eric, though critically injured, was still alive. He was rushed to medical evacuation, enduring a perilous journey to a mainland hospital where his survival would depend on immediate intervention. The aftermath was haunting. What had been a place of joyful preparation was left in ruins, shattered crates and lanterns scattered across snowdrifts, all against the backdrop of a howling storm. The loss of one life and the near loss of another underscored the grim reality of life in polar bear territory. Even in a close-knit settlement bound by tradition and resilience, the Arctic could turn hostile in an instant. The tragedy forced immediate changes. Safety procedures were revised, requiring stricter monitoring of food storage and greater caution during storms. Guards were ordered to remain on constant watch, even during festival preparations. For the community, the incident served as a stark reminder. The beauty of the Arctic was matched only by its peril, and survival demanded constant respect for the predators that shared the land. Kodiak Island, situated in the Gulf of Alaska, had earned recognition as one of the most pristine fishing destinations in North America by 2019. The island's remote streams, fed by glacial runoff and seasonal salmon runs, drew anglers from across the continent who sought both challenge and solitude. Thick alder thickets and towering Sitka spruces defined a wilderness that remained largely unchanged for centuries. Yet the island was also known as the home of the largest subspecies of brown bear in the world, with adult males sometimes weighing more than 680 kilograms during peak salmon season. Mark Dawson, a 36-year-old contractor from Seattle, had spent nearly 2 years planning a fishing trip with his younger brother Aaron, aged 32. Both were experienced fly fishermen, accustomed to navigating rugged waters throughout the Pacific Northwest, but this destination represented the ultimate test of their skills. Aaron, a software engineer by profession, had specifically arranged time off during the height of the salmon run to maximize their chances of landing truly remarkable fish. 3 days prior, the brothers had flown into the island's main settlement and arranged transport via bush pilot to a remote stream system some 40 kilometers from the nearest habitation. Their plan was simple yet demanding. Spend an entire week camping beside the water, documenting their catches, and immersing themselves in a wilderness few people ever encountered. Local guides had provided detailed instructions on safety protocols, stressing the necessity of storing food securely and making noise when moving through bear country. By their fourth morning, conditions seemed ideal. Recent rainfall had elevated water levels slightly, encouraging more fish to push upstream, and the sound of rushing water carried the crisp scent of pine that every serious angler found invigorating. Mark and Aaron selected a promising bend where the current formed natural holding pockets for large salmon. For nearly an hour, Mark worked a promising pool before feeling the powerful strike of a fish on his line. The battle that followed demonstrated the sheer strength of a Chinook salmon in full run, as the fish stripped line from his reel in forceful surges. Aaron stood downstream, capturing the event with his waterproof camera. After minutes of steady pressure, Mark finally guided the massive fish into shallow water, triumphant and exhausted. The salmon weighed close to 15 kilograms, exactly the kind of catch that had inspired the brothers to travel so far. Mark waited to secure it, while Aaron moved closer to photograph the moment. Their attention focused entirely on the prize they had worked so hard to achieve. Neither man noticed the silent arrival of a predator until it was too late. From the cover of dense brush emerged a Kodiak bear, massive in both stature and presence. Standing nearly 4 meters tall on its hind legs, the animal represented the peak of predatory strength within this ecosystem. Its heavy chocolate-brown fur and muscular shoulders marked it as a mature male, likely surpassing half a metric ton in weight. Drawn by the scent of salmon and the activity along the stream, it closed the distance with startling speed. Mark, still kneeling with the salmon, looked up only as the bear charged across the rocky bank. The animal's bulk seemed impossible for its agility, yet in seconds it was upon him. With no path of escape, Mark was forced against a boulder as the bear's massive paws pinned his chest and shoulders. Sharp claws tore across his fishing vest, shredding fabric and opening deep gashes along his arms and torso. Blood began flowing freely as he struggled helplessly beneath the crushing weight. His cries of distress carried across the stream, urging Aaron into action. Aaron abandoned his equipment and rushed forward. Armed only with his fishing rod, he struck at the bear's hindquarters, raising his voice in desperation. The animal turned suddenly, delivering a swipe that struck Aaron across the torso with terrifying force. The impact hurled him into the water, where he struck rocks and came to rest several meters downstream. Gashes along his torso and legs began bleeding heavily, staining the current with crimson. Both brothers now lay gravely injured while the bear returned its focus to the salmon lying near Mark's original position. Despite their condition, neither man surrendered. Mark, gasping from chest wounds, seized an aluminum landing net and swung with all remaining strength. Aaron, battered yet conscious, clawed his way back onto the bank and hurled stones at the predator. Their resistance seemed futile against such power, but desperation fueled them. The bear hesitated, seemingly torn between claiming the salmon and responding to the persistent human interference. It made several mock charges at Aaron, who stumbled backward with each advance before finally returning to the fish. After several tense minutes, the enormous animal dragged the salmon into the forest, leaving the brothers battered but alive. Hours passed before emergency crews arrived, guided by GPS coordinates transmitted from the brothers' beacon. Paramedics found Mark suffering from life-threatening lacerations across his chest and arms, while Aaron's torso and legs bore deep trauma from the attack. Both men required immediate evacuation and extensive medical intervention. The stream that had once promised a perfect fishing experience had instead become the site of a violent struggle for survival. What began as a long-awaited expedition between brothers was transformed in seconds into a reminder of the raw and unpredictable force of nature. The incident soon spread as a cautionary tale of the risks inherent in remote wilderness adventures, where the boundary between human endeavor and natural dominance is always fragile. A remote Alaskan island lay roughly 250 miles southwest of a major Alaskan city, a rugged landmass known for harboring the world's largest brown bears. The island's small fishing village had endured decades of coexistence with these massive predators, maintaining a careful balance between human activity and wildlife territory. September evenings brought crisp air, shortened daylight, and the promise of winter, a season when bears desperately sought final meals before hibernation. The village elementary school had planned its annual autumn play for September 15th, 2022, choosing an outdoor setting to allow space for families who could not fit inside the cramped gymnasium. The school's principal, Diane Keller, oversaw the event with meticulous care. Weeks of planning went into coordinating with teachers, who transformed a grassy area behind the school into an impromptu theater. Students had practiced tirelessly, crafting animal costumes from donated fabric and painting plywood backdrops designed to evoke forest scenes filled with tall trees and wildlife. Parents and siblings arrived early, eager for the children's performance. They set up folding chairs in neat rows while volunteers prepared a concession stand. The air filled with the scent of grilling food, carried on the breeze with the faint sweetness of popcorn and syrupy soda. Children laughed nervously behind the makeshift stage, rehearsing lines one final time. 23 families gathered in total, ready to watch their children perform a story about woodland animals and the cycle of seasons. None realized that a very real creature of the forest was drawing closer. A massive brown bear, later estimated at nearly 800 pounds, had been roaming the village perimeter for days. Its extraordinary sense of smell had caught the aroma of food from more than a mile away, guiding it steadily toward the school grounds. Bears of this species required vast caloric intake before winter denning, and this particular male had struggled to find sufficient salmon runs to support its size. Hunger drove it closer, overriding instinctual caution. The play began at 7 o'clock. A group of 8-year-old students stepped onto the grass, reciting verses about woodland creatures preparing for winter. Parents proudly recorded the performance on their phones, while younger siblings shifted restlessly in their chairs. The volunteer cook, a local fisherman named Tobias Brennan, remained at the grill behind the stage, turning hot dogs as aromatic smoke drifted across the gathering. From the tree line bordering the schoolyard, a dark shape emerged. Principal Keller noticed first. Years of life on the island had sharpened her instincts, and she recognized both the animal's size and the dangerous hunger that accompanied its steady approach. The bear moved with intention rather than hesitation, a sign of habituation to human food sources, always the most dangerous kind of wildlife encounter. She understood immediately that the outdoor performance could not continue. Rather than risk panic among families, she took control with calm authority, interrupting the event and directing everyone to move inside the gymnasium. Teachers reacted quickly, guiding confused children away from the plywood scenery, while parents hurriedly gathered belongings and younger siblings. The bear advanced with greater urgency once the scent of grilled meat intensified. Its patience dissolved. With shocking speed, it charged into the performance area. In an instant, weeks of after-school creativity shattered. Plywood backdrops splintered beneath the weight of its charge, and carefully painted scenery depicting cartoon-like trees and animals crumpled under its massive frame. Folding chairs toppled as families rushed for safety. parents scooping up children and ushering them toward the building's entrance. Brennan, positioned at the grill, suddenly found himself between the bear and the scattering crowd. Retreat was impossible. The bear lunged at the concession stand with a swipe powerful enough to scatter hot dogs, popcorn containers, and soda cans in every direction. Realizing noise was his only defense, Brennan pulled a bear banger, a small explosive device carried by many residents of the island for emergencies, from his tackle box. He ignited and launched it near the animal's feet. The device detonated with a sharp crack that echoed across the bay, smoke rising as the smell of gunpowder filled the air. The bear reared onto its hind legs, towering nearly 10 feet above the crushed concession tables. Its head swung between the fleeing families and the source of the explosion, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected resistance. Principal Keller, standing at the gymnasium entrance, made herself visible by waving her jacket and sounding a whistle. Her goal was to distract the bear and draw attention away from families still moving through the doorway. Her boldness provided a critical buffer of time. Parents hurried their children inside, while teachers conducted frantic head counts, ensuring no one remained outside. The combination of sharp noise, erratic movement, and the sudden absence of readily accessible food ultimately convinced the bear to withdraw. It dropped to all fours, retreating toward the tree line. Several times it paused, glancing back at the wreckage it had created. Then it vanished into the forest. The ordeal had lasted fewer than 5 minutes, yet it felt seared into memory for those who experienced it. Once safely inside the gymnasium, relief mingled with shock. Children cried openly, and adults tried to comfort them while concealing their own trembling hands. Remarkably, no one had been physically harmed. Still, the outdoor stage lay in ruins. Costumes were trampled into the grass. Backdrops were torn and splintered. The concession stand resembled a disaster zone of overturned tables, scattered food, and broken equipment. Local authorities arrived within an hour to assess the situation. Incident reports documented the bear's behavior and the community's response. Wildlife specialists confirmed what residents already suspected. The animal displayed signs of food conditioning. It had likely been exposed to human food sources in the past, making it bolder and more determined. Officials recommended stricter precautions during outdoor gatherings and urged the community to develop detailed bear-aware protocols for future events. In the weeks that followed, the failed school play became part of village memory. Parents retold the story to new residents. Children, though shaken at the time, grew proud of their resilience. Teachers praised Principal Keller's composure, crediting her actions with preventing chaos from spiraling further. The students eventually performed their play indoors, completing the story of woodland animals in safety, though the atmosphere carried a new edge of seriousness. The episode reinforced a hard truth long understood by island residents. The land belonged as much to the bears as to the people. No amount of planning could erase that reality. The 2022 incident became a lasting reminder of coexistence's fragile balance. A story of a night when the wilderness itself interrupted human performance, when a real forest predator stole the spotlight from painted backdrops and costumed children. The Svalbard archipelago lay deep within the Arctic Circle, a frozen chain of islands where polar night could last for months, and temperatures stayed bitterly cold even in summer. Despite human stations and research outposts, these islands belonged to the polar bear. Built for survival in a frozen desert, they hunted with patience, strength, and stealth, unmatched by any land predator. In May 2023, Nikolai Vetrovsky led a small technology research team into this forbidding wilderness. Their task was to test autonomous drones designed to operate without human guidance in extreme conditions. If successful, the machines could one day assist energy exploration, collecting geological data beneath the ice. Vetrovsky had invested 3 years refining the design, ensuring the drones could endure freezing winds, long distances, and harsh environments. His work represented a collaboration between international Arctic programs, each eager to push technological limits. The team established a temporary camp on a stable ice floe, about 15 kilometers from the nearest settlement. Alongside Vetrovsky were electronics specialist Anika Lysenko, skilled in communications equipment, and graduate student Boris Fedorov, tasked with recording atmospheric data. For 2 weeks, they would run continuous tests, far from shelter or help, in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Conditions in May offered more daylight than winter, but little comfort. Temperatures hovered near -20 degrees Celsius. Winds swept across the ice without warning, grinding snow into blinding whiteouts. Visibility could shift in moments, transforming a clear horizon into a wall of fog. Yet the drones were built for such trials. Each carried cameras and radar capable of detecting subsurface structures through thick layers of ice. On May 14th, the researchers launched 3 drones simultaneously in their first wide-area survey. Inside the insulated shelter, Vetrovsky tracked flight paths across his monitors. Lysenko monitored transmission strength, adjusting when signals weakened. Fedorov logged weather fluctuations and atmospheric interference. The test appeared successful. The machines flew steadily, endured the cold, and returned clear readings. After hours of smooth progress, the team allowed themselves to hope the mission would unfold without serious setbacks. But across the white expanse, danger had been stalking them. A massive male polar bear, weighing well over 1,400 pounds, had trailed their scent for more than 6 hours. Patient and silent, it padded across the ice with the endurance only its kind possessed. These predators could detect prey kilometers away and close the distance without a sound. For the bear, the humans represented an opportunity, and it had been waiting for the right moment to strike. That chance came when one of the drones malfunctioned. A GPS error forced it into an emergency landing just 50 meters from the shelter. Recovery was urgent. Losing the equipment could cripple their project. Vetrovsky prepared to retrieve it, while Lysenko kept communications steady with the remaining airborne drones. Outside, fog had thickened, veiling the horizon in shifting gray. The polar bear, its white coat blending perfectly into the frozen landscape, crept closer. Wide paws spread its weight so evenly across the crust of snow that even fragile surfaces held firm. When Vetrovsky stepped outside the shelter, the predator launched from less than 30 meters away. Despite its immense size, the bear sprinted at nearly 40 kilometers per hour. The distance vanished in seconds. Before Vetrovsky could react, the animal slammed into him with crushing force, knocking him backward into the tent frame. Canvas ripped, metal poles bent, and his body was pinned beneath hundreds of pounds of muscle. Claws raked his arm and shoulder, shredding fabric and drawing blood that stained the snow bright red. The attack might have ended instantly had the others not acted. Lysenko, without hesitation, grabbed a propane heater and swung it at the bear's shoulder. The blow caused no real injury, but the noise and movement startled the animal enough to break its focus. That moment gave Vetrovsky time to reach the flare gun holstered on his belt. He fired into the air. A blazing red flare streaked above them, hissing and crackling, smoke drifting through the fog. The sudden explosion of light and fire disoriented the predator's senses. At the same time, Fedorov activated the emergency beacon and shouted, creating more confusion. For several long seconds, the bear loomed over them, muscles rippling, jaws snapping close enough to strike. Then, surrounded by unnatural fire, noise, and human resistance, its calculation shifted. Even the Arctic's most dominant hunter weighed risk against reward. Slowly, the animal stepped back. Massive paws pressed prints deep into the snow as it withdrew into the fog. Within moments, it was gone, leaving only silence and the tracks of its charge. The danger had passed, but the mission was over. Vetrovsky's wounds were bound as the team prepared for emergency evacuation. The drones lay scattered and broken on the floe, abandoned where the bear's attack had crushed them. Hours later, helicopters carried the group back to safety. Scars would remain, both on Vetrovsky's arm and in the team's memory. Their research ended not with technological triumph, but with a stark reminder: in the frozen Arctic, humans are only visitors. The land belongs to the predators that have ruled it for millennia. A rural mountain region in Pennsylvania had experienced steadily increasing black bear encounters during the early 2000s as suburban development pressed deeper into traditional wildlife territory. The forests covering these ridges and valleys offered prime habitat, yet expanding residential areas created inevitable conflicts. Bears searching for food discovered garbage cans, pet food, and outdoor grills, unsecured resources that drew them closer to humans. Each autumn, as the animals prepared for hibernation, their search for calories intensified, producing bolder behavior that frequently intersected with communities unprepared for such encounters. One such community hub was a rural gas station along a highway that wound through the mountains. Open since the late 1980s, it served as a refueling stop for travelers and truckers navigating the steep, forested roads. Until recently, the facility had not experienced major wildlife problems, though locals occasionally reported seeing bears at the forest edge. The owner had installed motion-triggered lights and cameras in response to vandalism, unaware that these tools would one day record a serious wildlife confrontation. On October 23, 2021, unseasonably warm weather kept bears active well past their usual seasonal slowdown. A mature male black bear, weighing nearly 350 pounds, had been moving across the valley for weeks, tearing into dumpsters and raiding unsecured food sources around homes and businesses. The animal had grown emboldened by repeated success, conditioned to associate human settings with easy calories. The late-night shift at the gas station typically drew light traffic: long-haul drivers, shift workers returning home, and a handful of locals. Bright fluorescent lights illuminated the pumps and store, contrasting against the dark forest that pressed close around the facility. The glow of the station could be seen from miles away in the rugged landscape, a beacon for both travelers and animals. Among those stopping that night was a 43-year-old truck driver from Pittsburgh. Near midnight, he pulled in to refuel his rig and grab coffee to sustain him on the long drive east. The station, operating around the clock, existed precisely for drivers like him who moved goods overnight when traffic remained sparse. As the driver completed his fuel transaction, the black bear stepped from the tree line. Its nose carried it across the lot, led by the smell of discarded food from the station's dumpster and snack odors left behind by customers. Black bears possess acute olfactory powers, capable of detecting scents more than a mile away. This particular animal had been following food trails throughout the evening. Inside, the store clerk spotted movement outside the window. She recognized the animal immediately, watching as it sniffed around parked cars. Vehicles often provided meals in the form of wrappers, groceries, or camping supplies left visible on seats, and the bear had clearly learned this association. The situation escalated when the bear climbed onto the hood of a small sedan. Its bulk shattered the windshield and dented the frame, glass scattering across the pavement as the animal pawed into the interior, searching for food. The sound of crumpling metal and breaking glass echoed through the lot, startling both the clerk inside and the few customers outside near the fuel pumps. The clerk reacted quickly, locking the store's doors and phoning county authorities. From behind the glass, she saw customers stranded at the pumps, including the truck driver, who stood between his vehicle and the growing chaos. The bear's attention shifted from the sedan to the convenience store itself, where concentrated food odors drifted through the glass doors. It lumbered forward, smearing mud and scraping deep claw marks across the transparent surface as it tried to force entry. The animal's frustration grew as the food source remained just beyond its reach. Meanwhile, the truck driver found himself cornered between his rig and the bear's advancing path. Retrieving a tire iron from his cab, he prepared to defend himself should the animal attack. The bear rose on its hind legs, towering nearly 7 feet beside the truck as it peered into the cab. When the driver attempted to intervene, the animal dropped back down and lunged with surprising speed. He swung the tire iron, but the bear's powerful paw struck his shoulder, throwing him backward onto the pavement. His work shirt tore as claws raked across the flesh, leaving deep scratches that bled immediately. Inside the store, the clerk continued monitoring the unfolding scene. She activated the emergency air horn system usually reserved for fuel deliveries. The deafening blast echoed off the valley walls, its volume magnified by the still night air. The sudden noise startled the bear, which hesitated, ears flicking back in alarm. Faced with bright lights, loud sound, and human resistance, the animal abandoned its assault. It turned and moved swiftly toward the darkness, vanishing into the tree line beyond the station lights. In its wake lay damaged cars, scattered debris, clawed doors, and shaken witnesses. Emergency responders arrived within 20 minutes. Paramedics treated the truck driver's shoulder injuries, stitching several deep cuts. He was cleared to continue his route once stable, though the encounter left him shaken. His truck had escaped damage, but the incident would not soon be forgotten. Authorities filed reports and implemented new wildlife safety protocols for businesses in bear habitat. Requirements included bear-resistant dumpsters, stricter waste management, and staff training for dealing with wildlife incidents. The gas station owner invested in additional lighting, alarms, and reinforced waste enclosures to discourage future visits. The truck driver resumed his work routes but carried bear spray thereafter, maintaining heightened caution whenever he stopped at isolated stations during the night. Scars across his shoulder provided lasting evidence of how swiftly a routine stop could shift into a dangerous wildlife confrontation. State wildlife authorities investigated the situation thoroughly. They determined that the bear had become habituated to human food due to repeated success at unsecured dumpsters and outdoor storage. Officials launched a public education campaign across rural communities, urging businesses and households to adopt bear-resistant waste practices. News of the attack spread quickly through local media. The story sparked statewide debate about Pennsylvania's growing bear population, which had climbed from fewer than 4,000 animals in the 1970s to more than 20,000 by 2021. Conservationists celebrated the species' rebound, while business owners pressed for stronger policies to protect property and customers. The damaged sedan required a full windshield replacement and extensive repairs to the hood and roof. Insurance providers began examining claims more carefully, weighing the rising risks of wildlife-related damage in bear country. The gas station owner worked closely with wildlife specialists to create a model deterrent program. By combining secure waste storage, motion-activated alarms, and employee training, she aimed to minimize future risks. The measures became an example for other rural businesses facing similar challenges across the state. September 2024 brought cool evenings in rural North Carolina, and the Harper family looked forward to a night out at the local drive-in theater. Lisa Harper, a 41-year-old mother of two, had grown up in the region and often spoke of her love for simple gatherings with her children. She worked long hours at a small-town grocery store, but weekends were reserved for family moments. Her husband had passed away years earlier, so outings like these were her way of keeping joy alive for her kids. The drive-in was a tradition she cherished, a place where cars lined up under the stars and families shared snacks, while films flickered across a towering screen. That September evening, the lot was crowded. Engines cooled while children ran between cars with popcorn bags and sodas. The Harper family spread a blanket in the back of their pickup truck, filling it with candy, sandwiches, and pillows. Lisa laughed as her children climbed over cushions, preparing for the start of the movie. Around them, other families mirrored the same excitement. Headlights dimmed, and the glow of the giant screen washed the night in pale light. The air was filled with warmth, chatter, and the comfort of routine. Beyond the edges of the theater, the woods pressed close. Few paid attention to the dark tree line, but inside the forest, hunger moved on padded paws. That year, poor acorn harvests had left black bears searching farther into human spaces for food. Drawn by the scent of buttered popcorn, sweet drinks, and grilled hot dogs, one such bear slipped quietly from the cover of trees. At first, its shadow blended with parked vehicles and wandering children. Some thought it was a prank, a costumed visitor there to add novelty to the event. But as it drew closer, its size and slow, deliberate steps silenced the laughter. The bear climbed onto the Harper's truck with startling speed, the metal groaning under its weight. Lisa turned instantly, instincts flaring, and moved to shield her children. With a swipe of its paw, the animal tore across her arm, slashing deep lines of blood as popcorn and candy scattered across the blanket. Gasps broke into screams across the lot as the danger became real. Chaos unfolded in seconds. Car horns blared as drivers jammed their hands against steering wheels, hoping to frighten the animal. Engines roared, headlights cut across the screen, and people shouted, urging families to flee. The surreal mix of a glowing movie and raw animal fury painted the night with confusion. The bear roared in return, slamming its body against the truck bed, claws ripping into metal as Lisa pulled her children down and tried to shield them. The once festive gathering had turned into a fight for safety. The commotion only grew louder, and the bear, overwhelmed by the barrage of sound and light, hesitated on the truck. Its eyes darted across the chaotic scene, nostrils flaring, body tense, torn between hunger and retreat. The night's calm was gone, replaced by panic that echoed beneath the towering screen. The black bear finally dropped from the pickup, landing hard on the gravel with a thud that echoed across the lot. Its claws scraped the ground as it swung its head from side to side, confused by the wall of sound and motion that pressed against it from every direction. Car horns blared in sharp bursts, headlights flashed wildly, and the noise of engines swelled into a storm. The animal reared once more, roaring into the night, before it turned away from the panicked crowd. With one last swipe at the ground, it bounded toward the tree line and disappeared into the woods, leaving chaos and fear in its wake. Lisa clutched her injured arm, blood soaking through her jacket, while neighbors rushed forward to help. Her children clung to her side, shaking, their faces pale with shock. Volunteers tore strips of cloth and pressed them against her wounds, trying to slow the bleeding. Sirens wailed in the distance as emergency responders sped toward the scene, guided by frightened calls from families who had fled the theater. The movie still flickered above them, but the images no longer mattered. What people carried in their minds was the vision of wild power breaking through the safety of a familiar place. Paramedics arrived quickly, lifting Lisa onto a stretcher and securing her children with concerned neighbors. As she was carried toward the waiting ambulance, headlights revealed claw marks gouged into the metal of the truck bed. Food lay scattered across the gravel, trampled in the rush of feet. Families gathered in small groups, their voices hushed, each retelling the moment when laughter turned to terror. Parents pulled their children close, whispering reassurances even as their own hearts pounded with unease. By the following morning, the story had spread across the town. Officials closed the drive-in while wildlife officers searched the surrounding forests. Tracks were found leading deeper into the woods, wide and heavy, a reminder that the animal still roamed near. Rangers explained that the shortage of acorns and berries had driven bears into towns, where they searched for scraps of food. The familiar border between wild and human space had blurred, leaving families shaken about whether anywhere was truly safe. Lisa survived her injuries, though deep gashes across her arm and shoulder required surgery. Doctors spoke of her quick actions, how she had shielded her children and kept them alive in those frantic seconds. Neighbors called her brave, praising her instinct to protect her family no matter the cost. Her children remained shaken, their memories marked by the image of the massive figure looming over them against the glow of the giant movie screen. For weeks afterward, the theater stood silent, its once busy lot empty beneath the towering screen. People drove past and remembered the night when a hungry wanderer from the forest invaded their evening, a night when everyday life collided with raw nature. The event became a warning across the county, a story shared in schools, churches, and homes, reminding all who listened that the wilderness could appear at any moment, even in places where no one expected it. July 2025 brought searing heat across Wyoming, where wildfires burned for weeks and crews labored day and night to keep the flames from consuming more of the land. Among those crews was James Turner, a 34-year-old man who had dedicated his adult life to fighting fires in the most unforgiving conditions. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the calm confidence of someone who had faced danger many times before. Years of experience had taught him to endure smoke, exhaustion, and risk, but he also carried the weight of leadership, guiding younger firefighters in the field. His crew respected his steady presence, and he often took on the hardest tasks without complaint. The camp they built deep in the scorched forest was little more than tents, a supply cache, and tools spread across ash-covered ground. Charred trees stood like black skeletons, and the air smelled of smoke even at night. Days were filled with cutting fire breaks and hauling gear. Nights were restless, spent listening to the crackle of distant flames. The crew had worked until their muscles ached before finally lying down under the smoky sky. They did not know that in the same hills, a massive grizzly had been roaming, thin from hunger, its normal food gone from fire and drought. At 3 a.m, the quiet of camp was broken by the tearing sound of claws raking into boxes. The bear had found their food cache and was scattering supplies across the ash. Plastic cracked, metal rattled, and wrappers tore as it gorged on whatever it could find. James Turner rose quickly, instinct pushing him forward. Grabbing a shovel, he charged at the bear, swinging with all his strength in an attempt to drive it away. The animal spun with shocking speed, its eyes burning with frenzy. In one bound, it closed the distance, slamming James to the ground. Its weight crushed the air from his lungs as claws tore through his fire-resistant clothing as if it were paper. The shovel flew from his grasp as pain ripped through his body. The sound of his cries tore through the camp, waking the others. The crew leaped from their tents, grabbing Pulaskis and axes, the tools they used to carve fire lines, now raised as weapons. They shouted, struck at the air, and lunged at the beast, but each blow only seemed to enrage it further. The grizzly roared, its massive head snapping from side to side, its claws slashing at the men who dared approach. Sparks flew from steel, striking the ground as the crew tried desperately to save their comrade. James writhed beneath the beast, ribs cracking under its weight, muscles torn by raking claws. Ash filled the air, the firelight from smoldering stumps casting a red glow over the chaos. Desperation mounted as every second stretched into eternity, the crew's efforts seeming hopeless against the raw power of the predator that had claimed their camp. The moment seemed lost until one firefighter raised a flare gun, aiming not at the sky, but directly at the raging animal. With a loud burst, the flare ignited and struck, burning into thick fur. The sudden blast of fire and searing heat shocked the beast, which reared back, thrashing wildly. Smoke and the smell of scorched hair filled the camp as the predator bellowed in fury. For several tense seconds it stomped the ground, swinging its head in confusion and rage, before finally retreating into the charred hillside. The forest swallowed its massive form, leaving only echoes of its roars fading into the night. Silence gripped the camp except for the labored breathing of the men and the groans of James lying broken on the ground. His body bore deep wounds across his shoulder and chest, and his side rose unevenly with each painful breath. Blood stained the ash beneath him. His comrades dropped their tools and swarmed to his side, their hands pressing against torn flesh, wrapping bandages made from scraps of shirts, doing anything to keep him alive. Every face was pale, every hand shaking, the weight of what had just happened heavy on them all. Through the long hours before dawn, the crew kept watch, fearing that the bear might return. They built small fires around the camp, not for warmth but as barriers of light and smoke. The smell of burned food lingered in the air, mixed with the iron scent of blood, both reminders of the close call they had faced. James drifted in and out of consciousness, his groans softening into silence, his survival resting in the hands of those who refused to let him go. At first light, they signaled for help using radios and flares. A helicopter finally arrived, its rotors chopping the smoky air as it descended near the burned clearing. Medics carried James aboard, working quickly to stabilize his broken ribs and torn muscles. The rest of the crew watched as the aircraft lifted into the sky, the sight evoking both relief and a sense of emptiness. Their leader and friend had gone to fight another battle in a distant hospital. In the days that followed, the story spread through nearby towns. Officials warned that wildfires not only destroy land, but also push starving animals closer to humans, creating dangerous encounters in unexpected places. For the firefighters, the camp that night became more than a memory. It was a lesson written in blood and ash, a reminder that nature's fury comes in many forms, from flames that consume mountains to predators that stalk in the dark. James lived, though scars covered his body, and his strength would take months to return. His survival became a symbol for his crew, proof that even when chaos strikes without warning, courage and swift action can prevent disaster from becoming fatal. Yet none of them forgot the sound of claws tearing through camp, or the weight of knowing how close they all came to being lost in that blackened wilderness. November 2022 brought a cold wind to the city of Lublin in Poland, where a small traveling circus had set up its striped tent on the edge of town. Among the performers was a veteran animal trainer named Marek Kowalski, who had spent most of his adult life working with large predators. He was well known in his circuit for taming lions and teaching bears to perform routines for cheering audiences. Yet behind the applause, the work carried shadows. Long hours, constant stress on the animals, and the strain of keeping them obedient left marks both on the beasts and those who controlled them. Marek bore scars on his arms from past close calls, each one a reminder of how little control existed once an animal's patience snapped. The star attraction of that night's performance was Boris, a European brown bear that had been part of the circus since it was a cub. The animal, now fully grown and at its peak strength, was chained and fitted with a muzzle during each show. Trainers had conditioned it to balance on stools, roll barrels, and even bow to crowds under the glare of bright lamps. Children often clapped and laughed, their parents snapping photographs of the unusual spectacle. But those who worked closest to Boris had noticed his restlessness growing. In the days before the performance in Lublin, stagehands whispered about the bear's pacing, its loud huffs, and the way it resisted commands. On that November evening, the tent filled with families eager for entertainment. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of the crowd, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Music played from worn speakers as the performers led Boris into the ring, his chain clinking as he stepped heavily across the sawdust floor. Marek guided him to the center, raising his hands to cue the start of the routine. Under the harsh lights, Boris was made to stand, shift weight, and perform gestures unnatural to any wild creature. The audience clapped, delighted by the display, but tension brewed unseen beneath the surface. Boris's muscles tensed, his chest heaving with sharp breaths. Sweat shone on Marek's forehead as he pressed the bear into another trick. In a sudden eruption, the animal broke from the sequence. With With a violent surge, Boris lunged forward, knocking Marek to the ground. The chain snapped free from its anchoring, clattering against the stage. Chaos spread instantly. The crowd gasped as the huge form towered over its handler, claws flashing in the glare. Marek struggled beneath the crushing weight, the muzzle tearing loose as the bear slashed downward, ripping through his shoulder. Screams echoed against the canvas walls as benches toppled and people stampeded toward the exits. Parents clutched their children, stumbling in the rush as the once-ordered tent collapsed into panic. Boris bit into Marek's leg, the sound of tearing fabric and flesh mixing with the frantic cries. Stagehands scrambled with extinguishers, releasing bursts of white spray across the ring, filling the air with choking clouds. Others fired blanks from small pistols, each shot cracking through the noise. But the bear, wild-eyed and furious, held on. The performance had turned into a nightmare in seconds, the scene spiraling into pure chaos. The fire extinguishers sprayed thick white mist that clung to the air, clouding the scene as Boris thrashed in confusion. The blasts of sound from blank rounds cracked louder, bouncing inside the canvas walls. The bear hesitated for a brief moment, blinking through the haze, muscles rippling as it swung its head from side to side. Marek lay broken beneath the heavy form, his clothes shredded, his body slick with blood, but still clinging to life. With one last furious swipe, the animal finally staggered back, stumbling toward the cage that had been hastily rolled into the corner. Stagehands moved in frantic unison, slamming the steel gate open as others waved poles and sprayed more bursts of smoke. Shouts mixed with the roars of the beast as it lumbered into the shadows of its pen, driven less by obedience than by the chaos surrounding it. The door clanged shut. The lock snapped in place and the tent fell into stunned silence, broken only by the cries of the injured trainer. Families continued to rush out into the cold night, some carrying children, others trembling as they stumbled across the muddy field beyond the tent. Inside, the aftermath grew heavier. Marek was lifted carefully by medics who had been called from outside, his torn leg wrapped in cloth as they tried to slow the bleeding. His shoulder hung uselessly, bones splintered by the weight of the claws. His face was pale, his breathing ragged, but he was alive. Every step to carry him out was marked with fear that the bear might lunge again, though the cage rattled only with the echo of its heavy breaths. By morning, the attack had become the talk of the city. Newspapers printed stark accounts from shaken spectators who described the sight as nothing less than terror. Parents spoke of children who cried through the night, haunted by the sound of roaring under the striped roof. Officials arrived to investigate, their questions sharp, their faces grim as they examined the cage and the chains that had failed. Debate soon filled the streets. Voices rose against the use of wild animals for tricks, calling the scene proof of cruelty and danger. Others mourned the sight of an injured trainer, wondering how long scars and pain would follow him. For Marek, survival came at a terrible cost. His career forever ended, his body marked by wounds that would never fully heal. For the witnesses, the memory of that night would never fade, a chilling reminder that no cage or chain could erase the nature of a bear forced to perform. The Ussuri-Krai region of Russia, with its dense taiga forests stretching endlessly toward the Chinese border, had long been recognized for its untamed wilderness. In June 2025, the area grew increasingly popular among adventure tourists seeking authentic experiences away from overcrowded destinations. The remote forests, inhabited by Siberian tigers and Asiatic black bears, offered breathtaking aerial views rarely seen by outsiders. Local operators had begun arranging hot air balloon rides over the pristine wilderness, though oversight remained inconsistent and safety procedures varied widely between providers. Among those drawn to this isolated adventure was Olga Petrov, a 42-year-old engineer from Vladivostok. She had meticulously planned the journey as a graduation gift for her daughter, Irina, who had just completed secondary school and was preparing to attend university in Moscow that autumn. Joining them was Sergei Ivanov, a 50-year-old entrepreneur who managed a chain of dining establishments in the region, accompanied by his nephew, Mikhail Voronin, a 28-year-old photographer eager to capture images of the vast wilderness. Two tourists from Uzbekistan, 33-year-old Rustam Karimov and 31-year-old Amina Sharapova, met the group at their hotel and agreed to share the balloon ride in order to reduce expenses. The morning of June 24th arrived crisp and clear, with calm air and minimal winds. seemingly perfect for flight. The group assembled at a makeshift launch site carved into a forest clearing. Their pilot, an older local man who claimed decades of experience, prepared the balloon while speaking with confident authority. The wicker basket appeared sturdy, though fraying could be seen along several connecting ropes. When concerns were raised, the pilot dismissed them as routine wear, insisting there was no cause for alarm. As the balloon lifted gracefully into the sky, the 6 passengers were immediately captivated by the panoramic view. Below stretched an endless sea of green canopy, broken only by winding rivers that shimmered like silver ribbons under the morning sun. Irina eagerly pointed out animal movement in the treetops, her youthful excitement filling the air. Mikhail busied himself with his camera, capturing the serene wilderness from every angle. Rustam and Amina, meanwhile, compared the Russian taiga to the mountain landscapes of their homeland, reflecting on similarities and contrasts. The ride felt dreamlike, a rare escape from the noise and weight of city life. For nearly an hour, the balloon glided peacefully, shifting between altitudes as the pilot adjusted burners to catch favorable wind currents. He occasionally explained elements of balloon navigation, his tone suggesting a man proud of his skill. Olga felt deep satisfaction in witnessing her daughter's joy, while Sergei's thoughts wandered toward future company outings, imagining similar adventures for his employees. Every sign suggested the day would remain flawless. The first indication of danger came when the balloon's descent began to accelerate, despite repeated burner adjustments. The pilot muttered anxiously as he worked the controls with increasing urgency. The vessel continued to sink, the forest canopy rushing closer at an alarming rate. Towering fir trees, some stretching nearly 40 meters high, loomed suddenly near the basket's edge. Confusion rippled among the passengers. They braced themselves as the pilot issued urgent instructions, though his hurried words were not understood by all. Mikhail quickly conveyed the message to Rustam and Amina, urging them to secure themselves against the basket wall. Tension mounted as the trees drew closer. Disaster struck when the balloon snagged against a particularly tall fir. Fabric tore with a harsh ripping sound, releasing hot air in a violent rush. The envelope shredded along its seam, sending the basket tilting precariously. Passengers collided as the vessel lurched violently downward. Loose equipment clattered across the floor. Within moments, the balloon plummeted the final stretch and crashed into a forest clearing with brutal force. The impact was devastating. The basket overturned, pinning Olga and Irina beneath one of its heavy panels. The pilot was thrown clear and landed unconscious near the deflated balloon envelope. Sergei and Mikhail, though badly shaken and bleeding from cuts, remained mobile. Rustam suffered a head injury that left him disoriented and bleeding, while Amina clutched her twisted ankle, grimacing in pain. The clearing fell into an eerie stillness. From beneath the overturned basket, faint cries of distress revealed that Olga and her daughter were alive but trapped, their voices edged with pain. Sergei and Mikhail, despite their injuries, struggled to lift the heavy panel but could barely shift it. Around them, remnants of their lunch, sandwiches and fruit, were scattered across the ground. It was then that the wilderness revealed its most terrifying presence. From the tree line, a massive bear emerged, drawn by noise and the scent of food. Standing upright, the animal towered nearly 3 meters tall, embodying the raw, unyielding force of the wild. The bear advanced without hesitation, reacting either from territorial instinct or confusion at the chaotic scene. It moved directly toward the overturned basket where Olga and Irina lay trapped. The wicker structure rattled under its claws as the animal pressed its weight upon them, shredding through with alarming power. Desperate to intervene, Sergei and Mikhail attempted to draw the predator's focus. Their shouts and frantic movements managed to gain its attention briefly. The bear swiped Sergei aside with terrifying strength, hurling him into the undergrowth where he lay motionless. Mikhail seized a broken section of basket pole and struck at the animal, but its sheer mass overwhelmed him, knocking him down with crushing force. Rustam, staggering from his head wound, grabbed a heavy branch in defiance. He swung wildly, landing a strike that barely deterred the bear before claws raked across his chest, leaving deep, bleeding wounds. Amina, unable to flee on her injured ankle, tried to shield herself behind debris, but the animal struck her arm, leaving painful lacerations. The assault lasted mere minutes, though to the survivors it felt endless. Confusion, blood, and terror filled the clearing until, abruptly, the bear retreated. Perhaps the noise, resistance, and strange wreckage convinced it to withdraw deeper into the forest. Silence descended again, broken only by the pained groans of the injured. Time dragged on as the survivors endured shock and agony. Hours later, rescue helicopters finally homed in on the crash site, guided by emergency beacon signals. Paramedics rushed in to find all 6 survivors in various states of critical condition, 4 hovering on the edge of collapse. Huddled together among torn fabric and shattered wicker, they clung to one another in disbelief. What had begun as a joyous morning flight had ended in a struggle for survival, etched into memory as a stark reminder of the unpredictable dangers lurking within the wild. The tragedy soon circulated widely as a cautionary tale, highlighting both the allure and the perils of adventure, tourism in remote places where rescue resources remain limited and where nature's power cannot be underestimated. The remote wilderness of northwestern Montana had drawn families in search of authentic outdoor experiences since the early 2000s. During that period, cabin rentals in isolated landscapes became increasingly popular among urban residents, eager to escape the relentless pace of modern life. By 2017, dozens of rustic private cabins were scattered across the region's vast forests, each one offering visitors a temporary retreat into a quieter, more elemental existence. These small wooden structures provided the opportunity to disconnect from the digital world while still remaining within a reasonable distance of basic emergency services. The forests themselves were both beautiful and formidable. Towering pines stretched toward the sky, their trunks thick with age, while undergrowth formed a dense tangle that made travel off the trails nearly impossible. Wildlife thrived in these untouched ecosystems, ranging from small foraging animals to predators that commanded respect. Encounters with deer, elk, and smaller mammals were common and usually harmless, but the looming presence of bears, cougars, and wolves was an ever-present reality. Most visitors never experienced anything more alarming than a startled deer bolting across a trail, yet the possibility of something more dangerous remained a constant reminder of the wilderness's raw power. Thomas Jensen, a 42-year-old accountant from Minneapolis, was among those who had succumbed to the lure of these wild spaces. 3 years earlier, he had purchased a secluded property with a rustic cabin, envisioning it as a weekend retreat where his family could reconnect with one another away from the demands of suburban life. His wife, Patricia, 38, worked as a school administrator and immediately appreciated the property's complete lack of internet connectivity, something she saw as essential for encouraging meaningful time together. Their children, Emma, age 14, and Lucas, age 11, had initially grumbled about the absence of electronic entertainment, but over time they grew to value the experience. Hiking, fishing, and discovering small wonders of the forest became activities they associated with family bonding rather than inconvenience. The cabin sat on 20 acres of heavily forested terrain, positioned roughly 15 kilometers from the nearest paved road. Access required navigating a winding gravel track that became treacherous in rain or snow. Thomas had invested in modest infrastructure improvements. Solar panels provided limited electricity, supplemented by a propane generator when demand rose. A hand-pumped well offered fresh water, while a wood-burning stove heated the cabin during the colder months. Despite its remoteness, the property represented a balance between primitive living and essential comfort. It gave the family the sense of genuine wilderness immersion without the discomfort and complications of tent camping. Their July weekend visit followed the predictable rhythm of past trips. On Saturday, they spent the day hiking familiar trails, stopping often to examine wildflowers or gather rocks of unusual shapes. The children displayed their unique personalities in these pursuits. Emma, thoughtful and artistic, experimented with photography by framing forest details in her camera lens, while Lucas, restless and curious, scoured the underbrush in search of insects to capture temporarily in jars. Patricia managed the evening meal at the outdoor fire pit, grilling steaks while Thomas assisted the children in roasting marshmallows. The smoky aroma mingled with fresh mountain air, creating an atmosphere both comforting and primal. After the meal, the family retreated indoors as the weather shifted. A soft rain began to patter on the cabin's metal roof, filling the air with the earthy scent of wet pine needles. They gathered around Thomas's laptop, one of the few concessions to modern conveniences during these trips, and watched a lighthearted adventure film. The steady rhythm of rain on steel, coupled with the flickering glow of the screen, made the cabin feel secure and insulated, as though the outside world had faded into irrelevance. Near midnight, Thomas stepped outside. Rather than using the cabin's primitive indoor facilities, he preferred to relieve himself outdoors, as he often did during these weekends. The rain had ceased, leaving the night air sharp and clean. Clouds shifted across the sky, revealing fragments of moonlight that illuminated the clearing. For a moment he stood still, inhaling the silence, recognizing it as something rare and precious compared to the ceaseless hum of the city. It was then that movement caught his attention. At first, he assumed the large shadow near the outdoor dining area was merely a trick of dim light, or perhaps a deer nosing through leftovers. But as his eyes adjusted, the form revealed itself as something far larger, more deliberate, and more dangerous. Drawn by the lingering scent of grilled meat and the unsecured trash container Thomas had left on the porch, a grizzly bear had wandered into the clearing. Towering over 2.5 meters when standing fully upright, the bear embodied the wilderness at its most formidable. Its thick coat rippled with power, and its presence radiated raw dominance. This was not a distant, theoretical danger from a pamphlet about wilderness safety. It was reality, immediate and undeniable. As Thomas shifted his weight, his foot snapped a branch underfoot. The sharp crack echoed unnaturally loud in the night. The bear turned at once, dark eyes locking onto him. Then, with terrifying speed, it charged. Thomas barely had time to react. The massive body closed the distance in seconds, and before he could retreat inside, the bear's momentum slammed him against the cabin's log wall. The impact rattled the structure, shattering porch furniture and clawing deep gouges into the wooden frame. Thomas rolled sideways, narrowly avoiding a direct strike, but he found himself trapped in the open with no clear escape. Inside, Patricia and the children heard the violence erupt. The sudden crashing and deep guttural sounds left no doubt that something catastrophic was occurring just beyond the walls. Emma and Lucas instinctively took shelter under the dining table, while Patricia pressed herself to a window, her mind torn between the terror of what she witnessed and the instinct to protect her children. Outside, her husband fought for survival against a predator that seemed unstoppable. Desperation took over Thomas's actions. He seized a heavy wooden chair from the porch and began swinging it wildly, smashing it against the wall and shouting with all the force his lungs could muster. The noise echoed through the clearing, startling birds from nearby trees. His only hope was that the sheer chaos would make the bear reconsider. Each blow splintered the chair further, but the racket seemed to rattle the predator's confidence. Minutes dragged like hours. Finally, the grizzly backed away, pacing at the edge of the clearing before melting into the forest shadows. Thomas froze against the cabin wall, muscles locked, ears straining for any sign of its return. His chest heaved with exhaustion and adrenaline. He realized with stark clarity how close death had come to his family. When he eventually re-entered the cabin, his family's fear was palpable. Patricia clutched the children tightly, Emma's tears soaking into her mother's shoulder, while Lucas's repeated questions, pleading to know whether the danger was truly gone, filled the small space. The immediate threat had passed, but its imprint lingered. Thomas's injuries were superficial, scratches along his arms and deep bruises across his ribs. Yet the psychological scar was profound. The family's retreat, once a sanctuary of peace, had revealed the full truth of wilderness living, beauty inseparably intertwined with danger. For months afterward, the memory of that night haunted them, a constant reminder that nature's grandeur came hand in hand with risks that suburban life rarely prepared anyone to face. The rolling hills of northern Italy's Trentino region had supported viticulture for more than 2 millennia, with Roman settlers among the first to recognize the land's remarkable potential for wine production. By 2021, the region had balanced traditional methods with modern agricultural technology, producing internationally acclaimed wines from indigenous grape varieties. Despite this success, the area's proximity to the Alps meant that wildlife encounters, though rare, remained possible as brown bears occasionally descended from mountain forests in search of food. Luca Romano, a third-generation winemaker aged 38, had inherited his family's vineyard from his grandfather 5 years earlier. The 12-hectare property specialized in Marzemino, a distinctive red grape that thrived in the region's unique microclimate. His commitment to sustainable farming and minimal intervention winemaking had earned recognition across Europe, though the demands of harvest season required constant vigilance. Working with him was Sofia Benedetti, a 31-year-old agricultural engineer from Bologna. She joined the vineyard 2 seasons earlier and brought expertise in irrigation systems and soil management that complemented Luca's traditional knowledge. Together, they implemented precision farming practices that improved grape quality while reducing water consumption, an increasingly critical concern during dry summers attributed to climate change. On August 23rd, the day had reached nearly 35 degrees Celsius before cooling into a pleasant evening. Inspections at dusk were vital for determining harvest readiness. The Marzemino grapes had nearly reached peak maturity, meaning every hour of monitoring carried weight. Luca moved row by row, sampling grapes to judge sugar levels and flavor development. His trained palate could detect subtle signs of readiness, information essential for timing the harvest. Sofia, about 50 meters away, checked the drip irrigation lines. Sensors reported soil conditions that guided water distribution during these final weeks before harvest. Both were deeply focused on their tasks when the unexpected occurred. From the oak forest on the vineyard's edge, a massive brown bear emerged. Adult bears were rarely seen in the region, making the sight shocking. This animal appeared to be a large male, weighing close to 200 kilograms and standing nearly 2 meters tall. Drawn by the aroma of ripening grapes, it entered the vineyard in search of food. The bear advanced quickly, crashing through rows of vines. Wooden trellises splintered beneath its weight, and clusters of fruit were crushed underfoot. The destruction unfolded in seconds, shattering the quiet evening with the sounds of breaking wood and bursting grapes. Luca tried to drive the bear away by flashing his light and shouting, but the animal pressed forward undeterred. When he moved closer in desperation, the bear lashed out with its paw, hurling him backward into a support post and tearing his jacket. The blow left deep scratches across his chest and shoulder. Dazed and bleeding, Luca struggled to rise. The bear continued tearing through the vines, but its closeness made any movement perilous. Seeing him injured, Sofia seized a metal irrigation pipe and charged forward, striking in an attempt to distract the animal. Though her background offered no training for such encounters, she acted instinctively. The bear swung at her, knocking her down and slashing her legs with its claws. For several harrowing minutes, both tried to avoid further injury while resisting the rampaging animal. Luca, fighting through pain and dizziness, managed to activate an emergency alert on his phone, though he knew help would take time to arrive. Sofia continued brandishing tools to hold the bear's attention, determined to protect them both despite her wounds. Eventually, the bear appeared to lose interest. Having eaten enough grapes and trampled its fill, it retreated toward the forest. The sudden silence left behind a scene of devastation. Broken trellises, crushed vines, and ruined fruit scattered across the ground. Years of cultivation had been destroyed in moments. Emergency responders reached the site about 45 minutes later. Luca was treated for deep lacerations and possible internal injuries from his collision with the post. Sophia's leg wounds required cleaning and suturing, but no major arteries had been damaged. Both survived, though shaken. Physical recovery came with time, but the psychological impact lingered. The section of vineyard devastated by the bear required full replanting, a costly setback that insurance only partly covered. For months afterward, Luca and Sophia adjusted their routines, approaching evening work with greater caution. The incident spread quickly among neighboring growers. Many viewed it as a warning about the unpredictable intersection of agriculture and wildlife, particularly as climate change altered traditional animal behaviors. The Trentino encounter, though isolated, underscored the vulnerability of even the most carefully maintained vineyards to forces beyond human control. A vast wilderness stretched endlessly across northwestern Montana, its pristine valleys and towering peaks standing as a testament to untamed America. Established as a federally protected area in the mid-20th century, this million-acre expanse had borne witness to countless expeditions over the decades. Some had ended in triumph, with hunters returning home successful and families provided for. Others had ended in struggle, with parties battling weather, injury, or exhaustion. Yet none would conclude as tragically as the journey that began on the summer holiday of July 4th, 2025. This wilderness had long been known as Grizzly country. Seasoned hunters recognized this reality, treating the knowledge with respect rather than dread. For most, the presence of bears was not a matter of fear, but of careful preparation, constant vigilance, and a quiet acceptance that the land ultimately belonged to the animals. 3 men from the city of Missoula had planned their summer hunting trip for months. Calder Voss, Reed Harlow, and Jonas Mercer were no novices to the outdoors. They carried with them decades of experience, each familiar with the rigors of Montana's backcountry. Calder, aged 47, was a construction foreman who had been leading hunting expeditions since his early 20s. Reed, at 52, worked as a wildlife photographer when not pursuing game. His livelihood had given him an unusually deep understanding of animal behavior, particularly the ways in which predators moved and fed. Jonas, the youngest at 43, worked for a government resource agency and knew the terrain of the northwestern wilderness almost as well as he knew the streets of his own neighborhood. The 3 had obtained their seasonal permits through the regulated lottery system. Their packing was meticulous. Weeks of preparation went into ensuring that nothing essential would be forgotten. The expedition was planned for a full week. Their primary goal was clear and practical: locate a mature bull elk, harvest the meat, and return home with enough to sustain their families through the coming winter. For men of their caliber, veterans of countless successful hunts in equally remote terrain, the mission seemed routine, if challenging. On July 5th, they established a base camp near a creek that wound gracefully through a meadow rimmed by dense forests of lodgepole pine and spruce. The chosen site offered fresh water, strong lines of visibility, and multiple escape routes. These were not just luxuries, but survival measures, standard protocol for camping in territory where bears might roam. In strict adherence to regulations, the group stored food in bear-proof canisters and suspended provisions at a safe distance from their tents. They maintained a tidy campsite, reducing the risk of attracting unwanted attention. The morning of July 6th broke with clear skies and promise. At dawn, Jonas discovered fresh elk tracks near the creek bed. The men readied themselves for what they anticipated would be a successful day of tracking. Moving methodically through the forest, they followed game trails and subtle signs of the herd, pushing deeper into the wilderness. Hours of patient effort paid off by midday when they located a small herd grazing across a distant meadow. With practiced efficiency, the men set their plan in motion. Reed took position with his rifle, while Calder and Jonas circled wide, creating subtle pressure to drive the herd toward him. The strategy unfolded as intended. A mature bull separated from the others and fell swiftly to Reed's well-placed shot. Experience had taught them that celebration would have to wait. The men worked quickly to field dress the animal, knowing full well that the scent of blood carried far on the summer air and could draw predators with alarming speed. They had completed roughly half the butchering when the silence of the forest shifted. Jonas noticed first, Birds that had been calling fell quiet. The rhythmic background of the wilderness seemed to withdraw, replaced by a tension that prickled at the edge of awareness. Moments later, the predator revealed itself. From the shadow of the timberline emerged a grizzly bear of immense size, later estimated by officials at more than 600 pounds. In most encounters, bears avoided human contact, retreating when aware of people nearby. This animal, however, had been tracking the blood scent for miles. Hunger and territorial instinct overrode caution. The massive boar advanced directly toward the hunters with terrifying intent. Calder reached his rifle first, but was unable to secure a steady aim before the bear closed the distance. With shocking power, the animal struck, its claws raking across his torso and slamming him against a spruce trunk. Reed attempted to recover his weapon, but the bear pivoted with unnerving agility for its bulk. A single blow from its paw sent Reed collapsing beside a fallen log, his body motionless. Jonas, positioned at a slight advantage, managed to fire twice, yet the bear's thick hide and dense fat absorbed the rounds with little effect. The enraged predator turned on him, jaws clamping brutally into his shoulder. Shaking him with violent force, the bear flung Jonas aside as if he were weightless. However, Jonas managed to crawl behind a large boulder, severely wounded but still alive. His shoulder was torn and bleeding heavily, but he remained conscious as the massive bear turned its attention back to the elk carcass. From his hiding position, Jonas witnessed the grizzly establish complete dominance over the kill site, feeding and marking its territory. The entire sequence of violence lasted less than 3 minutes, but Jonas observed the aftermath unfold over several hours. The bear remained near the carcass, occasionally checking on Calder and Reed's motionless forms. When the animal finally moved deeper into the forest, Jonas attempted to help his companions, but both men had succumbed to their devastating injuries. Despite his own severe wounds, Jonas managed to activate the group's emergency satellite communicator, providing rescuers with precise coordinates and a detailed account of the attack. His testimony would prove crucial for wildlife officials attempting to understand the incident. When the men failed to check in via satellite communicator on July 7th, concern spread rapidly among their families. However, Jonas had managed to send one final transmission before losing consciousness, alerting authorities to the attack location. These were not careless men. Their absence from scheduled communication suggested serious trouble. Authorities were contacted, and search teams mobilized immediately, aware that time was critical in wilderness emergencies. On July 8th, rangers located the campsite using GPS coordinates from Jonas's emergency transmission. What they encountered left even the most seasoned personnel shaken. Enormous paw prints, some measuring more than a foot across, covered the ground. Camping equipment lay shredded and scattered. Rifles were bent beyond function. Backpacks were torn as if by blades. Calder's body was discovered where the bear had left him, still slumped against the spruce tree, his injuries devastating. Reed was found near the log, the earth scarred with deep furrows where he had been dragged. Jonas was found behind the boulder, where he had taken shelter, having succumbed to blood loss and shock several hours after the attack. His final transmission and the evidence at the scene allowed investigators to reconstruct the sequence of events with remarkable accuracy. The elk carcass had been almost entirely consumed, reduced to fragments of bone and strips of hide. Every scrap of meat was gone. Evidence suggested the bear had remained in the area for more than 24 hours following the attack, guarding its prize and ensuring that no scavengers approached. Wildlife officials were able to piece together the attack details from Jonas's emergency transmission, the positioning of the bodies, and physical evidence at the scene. The animal was determined to be a dominant male, likely defending both territory and food. The bear had probably been shadowing the herd well before the hunters arrived, making the fatal encounter all but inevitable once the elk was killed. The tragedy served as a stark reminder of nature's unpredictability. Even the most skilled and prepared outdoorsmen remained vulnerable when confronted with the raw power of wilderness predators. This remote corner of Montana had reclaimed 3 lives, underscoring a truth long known but often overlooked. In grizzly country, humans were never truly at the top of the food chain. The rugged wilderness of Sakhalin Island is a place of contrast, an industrial frontier carved into thick forests where oil field camps dot the shoreline. The region is remote, cold, and heavily forested, a place where human development and wildlife constantly overlap. For the men stationed here, The work was tough, but routine. Most days were a cycle of labor on the rigs, meals in the camp, and occasional hikes through the surrounding woodlands to clear their heads. In late summer, the men had grown accustomed to seeing signs of bears in the area. Large footprints marked the soft earth after rain, and overturned trash bins sometimes gave away nighttime raids. To the workers, the animals were a looming presence, usually unseen, but never forgotten. Despite this, there was little formal guidance on safety. Bears were regarded more as a distant risk than an immediate threat, and most of the men carried on with their routines, unarmed and unprepared. Ivan, a veteran worker, often walked the forest trails during his downtime. He found peace in the quiet surroundings, away from the constant hum of machinery. On a gray afternoon, as low clouds settled over the tree line, he decided to take one such walk. The air was still, and aside from the rustling of branches, the forest felt strangely silent. What Ivan did not know was that a brown bear had been frequenting the area, drawn by food scraps left unsecured around camp. When bears associate human activity with easy meals, their natural caution fades. This particular animal had already been seen circling the perimeter of the site at night. On this day, it had lingered close to the trails, moving unseen between the trees. As Ivan walked further from the camp, the silence deepened. Then came the sound, a sharp crack of a branch behind him. He froze, scanning the woods. At first he saw nothing. Then, from the shadows, a hulking figure emerged. The bear's size was staggering, its bulk shifting smoothly as it closed the distance. Ivan turned and ran, but the bear surged forward with terrifying speed. The attack was sudden and overwhelming. The bear's weight slammed into Ivan, knocking him to the ground. It struck with claws and teeth, each blow delivering crushing force. He tried to shield himself, rolling and struggling to escape. But the animal's strength was beyond anything a man could resist. His shouts carried faintly through the trees toward camp. Several workers heard the commotion. At first they hesitated, uncertain of what they were hearing. Then the realization hit. Someone was under attack. Men grabbed tools and whatever they could find, sprinting toward the noise. Bursting through the undergrowth, they caught sight of the horrific struggle. Ivan pinned, the bear striking relentlessly. Without hesitation, the workers shouted and hurled objects, doing anything to distract the animal. A few struck it with sticks and poles, risking their own safety to draw its attention. The sudden noise and movement broke the bear's focus. With a final snap of its jaws, it pulled back, staring down the men with a deep growl. For a tense moment, it seemed the animal might charge again. Instead, it turned, lumbering off into the forest, vanishing among the trees. The ground was left in chaos. Ivan lay bloodied and motionless, barely conscious. The men rushed to him, pulling him to safety and desperately trying to stop the bleeding with torn clothing. There was no time to waste. The nearest medical station was hours away. They carried him back toward camp, working in silence, each step heavy with urgency. An emergency transport was arranged, and Ivan was rushed to a regional hospital. Surgeons fought to save him, and after hours of effort, he pulled through. His injuries were severe and life-changing, but he had survived what few ever could. The attack shocked the entire oil field community. Bears had always been a part of life on Sakhalin, but this incident made clear the dangers of complacency. Within weeks, safety protocols were introduced. Food was secured properly, trails were monitored, and workers were trained to recognize warning signs. For the men who witnessed it, the memory never faded. The image of the bear striking, the desperate rush to intervene, the moment when noise and courage forced a predator to retreat. It was a brutal reminder that in the remote wilderness, survival often depends not on strength alone, but on the will of others to stand and act. The vast wilderness of northwestern Wyoming stretched across millions of acres, where grizzly bears had lived long before human arrival. This immense ecosystem contained one of the largest bear populations in the continental United States, with more than 700 animals roaming remote valleys, mountain slopes, and river corridors. June marked the height of activity for these powerful predators as they emerged from winter dens, driven to feed heavily during the brief window of summer abundance. Among the humans venturing into this environment was Elliot Vance, who had organized a hiking expedition to celebrate completing graduate studies at a university in Colorado. 26 years old and trained in geology, he had invited 3 close friends to accompany him on a week-long backpacking journey through some of Wyoming's most striking mountain country. His companions included Mara Quinlan, a 24-year-old environmental science student, Dexter Harlow, a 27-year-old photographer eager to capture dramatic landscapes, and Isla Renner, a 25-year-old wilderness guide from Montana with years of backcountry experience. Together, they planned a route that would lead them along a river corridor framed by dense stands of spruce and pine. Their ultimate goal was a remote waterfall Isla had discovered during earlier expeditions, a dramatic cascade plunging more than 200 feet through a granite cliff. Reaching it would require 3 days of steady hiking through country, where encounters with grizzlies were not only possible but expected. By the morning of June 12, 2024, the group had traveled nearly 15 miles along the rugged trail. They reached a narrow stretch, hugging the river where trees pressed close to the path, creating a natural corridor with visibility limited to only a few dozen meters ahead. The roar of rushing water dominated the soundscape, muffling the usual forest noises that might have warned them of approaching wildlife. Unseen by the group, a massive grizzly had been working this same corridor for several days. Weighing more than 600 pounds, the animal fed on the first salmon of the season and on fresh vegetation sprouting after winter snowmelt. Possessing the territorial instincts of a dominant male, it reacted strongly to the scent of humans carried on shifting winds. Curiosity, mixed with aggression, drew it closer. The hikers paused at a scenic overlook where the river dropped through granite pools, providing a perfect place to rest and photograph the dramatic terrain. Dexter set up his camera equipment near the shoreline while Mara and Isla explored the rocks to view the water from different angles. Elliot studied their topographic maps, confirming their position in relation to their planned destination. Lunch supplies came out, energy bars, dried fruit, trail mix. While the group had followed all recommended safety guidelines by storing food in appropriate containers, the simple act of handling meals left odors on clothing and gear. Such scents, undetectable to the humans, carried easily across the forest and reached the nose of the bear now closing in on them. Moving silently, the animal advanced through cover, using the wind to its advantage. Despite its size, it was capable of extraordinary stealth, pushing through brush without a sound. The constant roar of the river concealed any noise it made. With each step, the distance shrank until only a screen of trees separated predator from prey. Isla, drawing on her guiding experience, noticed movement upstream. A dark shape emerged between spruce trunks, and she immediately recognized the deliberate manner of its approach. This was not casual foraging. She assessed the situation quickly, realizing that the bear's posture suggested a focused charge rather than simple curiosity. She alerted the others, and they began preparing to respond. The bear erupted from the trees with astonishing speed. Its massive body crossed the rocky terrain effortlessly, propelled by muscle and momentum. Dexter, positioned closest, tried to retreat toward the water, but the predator reached him first. A powerful forepaw swept across his back, the blow sending him sprawling across wet stones. His camera and gear flew apart in every direction, and his pack split open under the tearing claws. Elliot reacted by thrusting his aluminum trekking pole toward the animal's head. The strike bent harmlessly against thick fur and hide, achieving little more than a brief distraction. The bear shifted its focus instantly, striking Elliot with another swipe that tore through fabric and ripped into his shoulder. He fell hard across the trail. Mara rushed to help Dexter, pulling him behind a large downed log while blood seeped through slashes in his pack. Isla grabbed her metal water bottle and hammered it against rocks, creating loud clanging sounds meant to confuse and deter the predator. For long moments, the bear loomed over the group, muscles rippling, jaws parted, the ground vibrating under its weight. At last, faced with 3 determined humans making noise and resisting instead of fleeing, the grizzly's calculations shifted. These intruders were not easy prey. Slowly, the animal turned, retreating with measured steps into the shadowed forest. Deep tracks in the soil beside the river marked where it had stood before vanishing into the trees. The hikers wasted no time. Their plans for reaching the waterfall were abandoned. First aid supplies came out quickly. Elliot's shoulder wound was bandaged as best as possible, and Dexter's torn back was cleaned and wrapped. Both men were in pain but able to walk. The group began the long return journey towards safety. They carried emergency communication devices and soon managed to summon help. Authorities arrived to escort them from the backcountry. Medical staff treated the injuries at the trailhead, noting that both men would recover without lasting damage. The bear, meanwhile, melted back into the wilderness, where it continued its natural cycle without further human interference. The incident became part of official records documenting human encounters with grizzlies in Wyoming's mountains. It underscored once again the unpredictability of such animals, even when visitors followed proper guidelines and safety procedures. Weeks later, Elliot and Dexter both healed fully, though the memory of the attack left a permanent impression. Torn packs and shredded equipment served as reminders of their vulnerability in the face of a predator evolved for dominance in this landscape. Mara and Isla, though unharmed physically, shared the same sobering perspective. Humans might enter the wilderness with careful preparation, but in the end, they remain temporary visitors in a world governed by forces far larger and far older than themselves. On September 7, 2025, the Petrov family settled into their RV along a forested road in Russia's Amur region. They had been traveling for days, eager to enjoy the quiet wilderness before returning home. Alexei, a factory worker in Khabarovsk, loved the outdoors and often took his family on short trips, teaching them to respect nature while escaping the noise of city life. His wife, Tatiana, had packed warm blankets, food, and books for the children, wanting them to feel safe and comfortable even in remote places. Their daughter Mila, only 10, carried her sketchpad everywhere, filling it with drawings of animals and trees. At the same time, 7-year-old Daniil was full of energy, curious about every rustle in the forest. Together, they hoped for a peaceful night before the long drive back. The evening was calm. The children read quietly in their bunks while Alexei checked the RV's locks, and Tatiana heated a small meal on the stove. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, shadows deepening as night closed in. The family had camped before, but this road felt lonelier, surrounded by dark pines and distant hills. Still, inside the RV, the warmth of home traveled with them. They believed the walls of the vehicle would shield them from anything that moved outside. At around 2 a.m., the fragile calm shattered. A massive grizzly, gaunt with hunger, slammed against the side of the RV with a roar that shook the thin walls. The vehicle rocked violently as claws scraped against the metal frame. Glass shattered as the beast ripped through a side window, showering the interior with shards. Panic spread instantly as the family scattered, each movement frantic against the noise of tearing steel. Alexei grabbed the nearest object he could find, a fire extinguisher, and rushed forward. His effort was brave but hopeless. Within seconds, the bear's weight pinned him down, its claws and jaws tearing through him as the family screamed in horror. Blood spread across the floor while the walls shook with every impact. Tatiana, desperate, shoved Mila into a storage hatch and gestured for silence before turning back toward the bunks. Daniil tried to hide beneath the blankets, but the predator lunged, ripping through wood and fabric with terrifying ease. Tatiana's last stand was short as the bear's rage crashed down upon her. Mila crouched in the dark, hands pressed over her mouth, trembling as every sound tore through the night. Screams, crashing wood, then silence, broken only by the growls and the noise of the animal rummaging through the wreckage. Time stretched endlessly inside the ruined RV as the child waited, her heart pounding in her ears. The RV stood broken and silent as dawn spread a gray light over the Amur forest. Mila remained curled in the storage hatch, body stiff and mind frozen, the air thick with the stench of blood and the heavy musk of the predator that had torn her family apart. Hours dragged slowly and the child did not move, terrified that the beast might still be nearby. Every creak of the shattered vehicle made her flinch. The walls of the RV, once a safe shelter, now stood twisted and splintered, a cage filled with wreckage and memories too heavy for her young heart to bear. Outside, the forest carried on as if nothing had happened. Birds called through the morning mist, and a cool breeze pushed branches against the torn sides of the vehicle. The Grizzly had left after tearing through food and supplies, leaving only scattered pieces of clothing, broken furniture, and the silence of loss. The massive paw prints leading back into the trees were deep and wide, a testament to the unstoppable force that had struck during the night. When locals from a nearby settlement finally arrived, alerted by the absence of the Petrovs, who were expected on the road that morning, the sight before them froze their steps. The RV's windows were jagged holes, doors torn from hinges, and the ground stained dark. The scene spoke clearly of what had unfolded in those violent minutes. As they approached cautiously, one of the men noticed a faint, soft and uneven sound coming from inside the wreckage. They found Mila still hiding, her small frame pressed against the cold metal walls of the hatch. She was bloodied, her clothes torn, her face pale and streaked with tears, yet she was alive. When she was lifted gently from the hiding place, she clung tightly, trembling, eyes wide and unblinking. Her silence told more than words ever could. Officials arrived quickly, marking the site as one of the worst bear incidents the Amur region had seen in decades. Rangers followed the tracks into the forest, but did not locate the animal, knowing it could still be roaming nearby. They warned that food scarcity, shrinking habitats, and human encroachment had made grizzlies in the region unpredictable and dangerously bold. The Petrov family had unknowingly camped in a corridor where hungry predators roamed, their presence magnified by the scent of stored meat and warm food. Mila was taken into the care of relatives, her survival viewed as nothing short of miraculous. For the community, the tragedy served as a poignant reminder of the fine line between wilderness and safety. Villagers reinforced warnings about camping in isolated areas, underscoring the importance of caution. They emphasized the need for stronger barriers between people and wildlife. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Petrovs spread beyond the region. To many, it was not only a tale of devastation, but also of one child's endurance. In the cold silence of that ruined RV, Mila had carried the weight of survival, a fragile life preserved amid chaos, echoing the harsh truth that the Amur forest spares no one who underestimates its dangers. August 2024 unfolded with long days of fishing near Kodiak Island, where men had traveled to test their skills against rich waters filled with salmon. Among them was Aaron McCoy, a seasoned pilot in his early 40s. Aaron had spent much of his life guiding fishermen and hunters across the rugged Alaskan coast. Flying small planes into remote inlets was his way of life, a craft he had mastered after years of battling unpredictable winds and sudden storms. Known for his calm focus, he carried the responsibility of not only transporting clients safely, but also ensuring their survival in wilderness conditions where danger was never far away. The group of fishermen he ferried that week had come for the thrill of pulling heavy salmon from icy rivers. They worked in pairs, hauling coolers filled with the catch that would later be flown back to the mainland. These were men used to long days and tough conditions, their clothes soaked with salt spray and fish oil. Spirits were high as they moved toward the dock, tired but pleased, unaware that the smell of their hard work carried farther than they imagined. The wooden dock stretched out over calm water, its surface slick with moisture from sea air. Aaron prepared the float plane for departure, checking lines, inspecting fuel, and reviewing the weather as the fishermen organized their gear. The scene was ordinary, almost routine, until the wilderness reminded them how thin the line was between safety and peril. From the thick trees near the shoreline came the unmistakable movement of something heavy. The sound of splintering branches echoed across the inlet, followed by the thunder of paws striking earth. A massive Kodiak bear, drawn by the rich scent of salmon packed in the coolers, appeared at the edge of the dock. It wasted no time circling or sniffing. Instead, it surged forward with terrifying speed. The men froze for a moment, the size and power of the creature too overwhelming to process. Shouts erupted as the bear lunged down the dock, claws tearing into the wooden boards. One fisherman stumbled as he spun to retreat, his boot sliding on the wet planks. He tumbled sideways into the cold water just as the bear's paw slashed out, shredding his thigh. His cry of pain mixed with the roar of the predator as red spread quickly in the waves. Panic spread through the group. Some swung gaff hooks wildly, trying to strike the advancing animal, while others hurled ropes and bags in desperation. The air was filled with the clash of human voices, the thrash of water and the thunderous roars of the Kodiak that refused to slow its assault. On the float, the injured man clawed at slippery metal, desperate to climb back aboard. Every second stretched like an hour as the bear pressed forward, eyes locked on its prey, muscles rippling with raw force. At the cockpit, Aaron acted quickly. His hands shook as he moved for the ignition, knowing their only chance was the machine he trusted. The float plane came alive with a roar as the propeller spun into a furious blur, churning air into a violent blast. The dock shook under the combined weight of the beast and the machine, each side straining in the standoff that would decide who claimed the space. The force of the spinning propellers blasted wind and spray down the dock, hitting the advancing Kodiak with a wall of power it had not expected. The beast staggered, fur whipping in the torrent, eyes narrowing against the stinging rush of air. It roared in anger, rising on its hind legs before slamming down against the wooden planks once more. The sound shook the men to their core, yet the machine's fury was greater. The animal lurched forward again, then halted as the spinning blades tore the air between it and the fisherman. With a final bellow that echoed across the inlet, it turned sharply and bounded toward the tree line, crashing back into the wilderness it had emerged from. For several moments, no one moved. The dock quivered in silence except for the drone of the engine and the splash of water against the floats. Then the cries of the wounded fisherman pulled everyone into motion. His leg poured blood into the dark water, the gashes deep and ragged. His face was pale, but his arms thrashed as he clung to the side of the float, refusing to sink. Strong hands reached down, pulling him up with effort, dragging him into the cabin where his clothes were stained red. Inside, the men worked frantically to slow the bleeding. They tied belts and rope tightly around his thigh, pressing cloth hard into the torn flesh. Aaron kept the propellers roaring, eyes locked on the tree line, ready in case the animal returned. Minutes felt longer than hours until he was sure the predator had truly vanished into the forest. Only then did he ease the throttle and prepare the aircraft for departure. The float plane lifted from the inlet with a shudder, and the men pressed against the windows, staring down at the dock that had turned into a battlefield. Below, the boards bore deep claw marks, gear lay scattered, and one cooler bobbed in the water, spilling salmon into the tide. The wilderness had left its signature behind, a reminder of what they had faced and narrowly survived. By the time the plane reached the nearest hospital, the fisherman had grown weak, his breath shallow. Doctors rushed him into surgery, stitching muscle and repairing tissue torn by the bear's claws. Hours passed before news came that his life had been saved, though the scars would remain as a permanent mark of the encounter. Relief washed over the group, though their minds still replayed the chaos again and again. In the days that followed, wildlife officers issued warnings to villages and camps near Kodiak Island. They explained that bears often learn to linger near docks during salmon runs, their hunger drawing them to the scent of easy food. What many had thought of as safe havens for fishing and travel could quickly become ambush sites. The men who lived through that day carried the memory with them. The sound of roaring wind clashing against a roaring beast etched forever in their minds. For Aaron, the moment served as proof of the thin line between control and catastrophe. The dock had almost been their final resting place, yet quick action and a machine's power had shifted fate just enough to spare them. August 2021 was a busy season on Kodiak Island, where cruise ships carried groups of travelers, hoping to glimpse the world's largest brown bears in their natural habitat. Among those who stepped off the vessel was Michael Harrington, a 42-year-old tourist who had long been fascinated by wildlife. Back home, he was known among friends for his love of photography and for posting dramatic pictures of his adventures. The trip to Alaska had been a lifelong dream, planned for years, and he carried with him not just excitement but also an eagerness to capture images unlike any he had taken before. His phone was his constant companion, every scene through its lens becoming part of a collection he wanted to share with the world. Guides and rangers greeted the group with firm instructions. They spoke clearly about the dangers of approaching bears, warning that distance was the only real protection when entering their territory. The other tourists nodded, uneasy but attentive as they stepped into the rugged wilderness. The rivers shimmered with salmon runs and the scent of fish carried through the damp air. Along gravel bars, the bears moved with slow, deliberate power, dipping their massive paws into the water with ease. Cameras clicked from safe vantage points, the visitors awestruck by the sheer scale of the creatures. For most, the warnings were enough. They stayed clustered together, their guides keeping them close. But Michael's desire for a close-up burned stronger with each passing minute. His eyes locked onto one enormous Kodiak fishing at the edge of the current. Its fur was dark, wet with spray, muscles rolling beneath the thick coat as it hauled salmon from the water. It was the moment he had been waiting for. Quietly, while others were distracted, Michael slipped away from the group, his steps slow and careful as he moved toward the gravel bar. The bear continued its hunt, seemingly unaware, while Michael crouched low, lifting his phone. He positioned himself so the animal filled the frame, his own face tilted toward the lens. For a heartbeat, everything seemed perfect. The wilderness behind him, the massive predator in focus, his smile frozen in the glow of the screen. Then the animal raised its head. Its nose flared, eyes sharp as it fixed on the figure too close for safety. In an instant, its calm hunt turned into violent motion. With a surge of speed that defied its size, the bear charged down the gravel bar. Michael stumbled backward, his phone tumbling into the stones as panic seized him. Shouts erupted from the distant group, but the predator closed the distance in seconds. He tried to turn, tried to flee, but the Kodiak was upon him, claws striking his back and dragging him into the shallows of the river. Water splashed as the force of the impact sent him sprawling. The scene turned from wonder to horror in an instant, the wilderness revealing its merciless edge. Water churned as the bear's massive weight crashed into Michael, its claws raking deep and its jaws snapping with raw power. The gravel bar turned red as he was dragged across the stones, his body twisting helplessly under the strength of the predator. The tourists, standing with the guides, froze in shock, their shouts echoing across the river, but drowned out by the roar of the animal. Panic spread as some backed away toward the boats while others stumbled, unable to look away from the violent scene unfolding in front of them. The guides reacted with desperate speed, pulling flare guns from their packs. Bright streaks of light cracked into the air, hissing and sparking, but the predator did not release its grip. Warning shots echoed from rifles, ringing through the mist, but the sound only made the animal lift its massive head, its jaws stained, before lowering it again with terrifying force. Within seconds, silence replaced screams. Michael's struggle ended as the river carried the splash of water and the shifting of gravel back into stillness. The bear, gaunt from hunger, finally pulled away, its dark eyes flashing toward the group's flashing lights. For tense moments it stood broad and unyielding, every breath steaming in the cool air, as if daring anyone to come closer. The guides continued to fire, the air filling with smoke and sparks, until at last the animal turned. With heavy steps it retreated into the trees, vanishing between the dense trunks as quickly as it had arrived. What it left behind was horror that would never fade from the minds of those who had witnessed it. The tourists gathered in shock, many weeping, some clinging to each other as their bodies trembled uncontrollably. The guides moved quickly, keeping them together and urging them to the boats, while others stayed behind to mark the place. Phones had captured fragments of the chaos, screens shaking as the story burned itself into memory. But none needed proof. Every face showed the same truth. They had seen the cost of ignoring warnings in a land where survival depends on respect for nature's laws. When rangers arrived hours later, they found the gravel bar torn and stained, the scattered phone still lying in the stones where Michael had dropped it. The body was carried carefully from the shallows, covered, and placed onto the boat with solemn silence. The group sat wordless as they were ferried back, the joy that had filled their excursion erased by grief. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly. Reports described the attack as one of the most chilling in recent memory, not because of numbers, but because of its cause. Curiosity and recklessness had turned into tragedy, a reminder to the world of how little stands between safety and disaster in wild country. Officials repeated their warnings, urging future visitors to listen, to remember, and to understand that on Kodiak Island, distance means life. For the survivors, the image of the glowing movie-like scene they had expected was replaced forever by a darker one. The sight of a man reaching for a perfect picture had turned in an instant into a lesson that none of them would forget. The remote wilderness of Ussuri Krai in far eastern Russia had always been known for its unforgiving nature and dangerous wildlife. This vast region bordering China and North Korea is home to some of the world's largest brown bears, with males often weighing over 600 kilograms. The area's dense forests and winding rivers had witnessed countless encounters between humans and bears over the decades, but few as tragic as the one that would unfold on September 7, 2025. Viktor Sokolov, a 42-year-old construction foreman from Vladivostok, had planned the fishing expedition as a late summer getaway with his longtime friend, Irina Makarova, 38, who worked as a schoolteacher in the same city. They had decided to bring along Irina's younger siblings, Daniil, 16, and Alina, 14, who were visiting for their school holidays. The group had rented a modest 18-foot motorboat from a local outfitter, planning to spend the day fishing for salmon and pike along one of the region's pristine waterways. The morning had started promisingly enough. Victor had successfully navigated the boat approximately 15 kilometers upstream from their launch point, finding a secluded stretch of river that locals claimed held some of the best fishing in the territory. The water ran deep and clear, flanked by towering conifers and dense undergrowth that created an almost cathedral-like atmosphere. Irina had remarked earlier that morning how peaceful everything seemed, a stark contrast to their busy urban lives. What the fishing party did not know was that the summer of 2025 had been particularly harsh for the local bear population. An unseasonably cold spring, followed by drought conditions, had severely reduced the berry crops that normally sustained the massive Russian grizzlies through their pre-hibernation feeding period. Wildlife biologists would later confirm that many bears in the region were showing signs of severe malnutrition, making them increasingly desperate and aggressive in their search for food. By mid-afternoon, their fishing had been moderately successful. Victor had caught 2 decent-sized pike, while Daniel had managed to land his first salmon of the trip, much to his obvious delight. The fish were being kept in a large cooler filled with river water, and the scent of their catch was beginning to permeate the immediate area around the boat. Approximately 400 meters downstream, Yuri Petrov, a 51-year-old local guide who had been fishing these waters for over 3 decades, had anchored his smaller boat near a fallen log that often attracted fish. Petrov later told investigators that he had noticed unusual sounds coming from the forest throughout the day, including what he described as the distinctive huffing and branch breaking that typically indicated a large bear moving through dense vegetation. At approximately 3:47 p.m., according to Petrov's later testimony, he observed a massive brown bear emerge from the tree line roughly 200 meters upstream from where Victor's group had been fishing. The animal, which wildlife officials later estimated to weigh between 550 and 600 kilograms, appeared emaciated despite its enormous size. Its ribs were clearly visible, and its normally thick coat appeared patchy and dull. The bear had apparently been tracking the scent of the caught fish for some time. Without hesitation, the desperate animal plunged into the river and began swimming directly toward the motorboat with powerful, determined strokes. Bears are surprisingly capable swimmers, and this particular animal moved through the water with alarming speed and purpose. Victor was the first to notice the approaching danger. He immediately began shouting warnings to his companions while frantically attempting to start the boat's outboard motor. Irina quickly pulled both teenagers toward the center of the ship, telling them to stay low and remain calm. The witness would later describe Daniel as appearing more curious than frightened, while his younger sister Alina seemed to grasp the severity of their situation immediately. The motor, which had been running smoothly all day, chose that critical moment to fail. Victor pulled the starting cord repeatedly, producing only grinding sounds and occasional sputtering. The bear was now less than 50 meters away and closing fast, its massive head visible above the water as it powered toward them with single-minded determination. Yuri Petrov, witnessing the unfolding disaster, immediately fired a marine flare gun into the air and began shouting at the top of his lungs, hoping to distract or frighten the approaching bear. His efforts proved futile. The starving animal had apparently committed entirely to reaching the source of the fish scent and showed no signs of being deterred. The first impact came when the bear reached the boat's starboard side. Using its massive forepaws, it struck the fiberglass hull with such force that the entire vessel lurched violently to port. Victor lost his footing and fell backward, while Irina struggled to maintain her grip on both teenagers. The bear then began using its claws to gain purchase on the boat's side, its weight causing the vessel to list dangerously to one side. Victor managed to regain his footing and grabbed an aluminum boat hook, attempting to push the animal away. The bear responded by lunging forward and striking Victor with its right paw, the blow connecting with his chest and shoulders with devastating force. The impact sent Victor over the side and into the water, where the bear immediately turned its attention to him. 16-year-old Daniel, displaying either remarkable courage or teenage foolishness, attempted to help Victor by throwing their tackle box at the bear's head. This action only served to attract the animal's attention to the boy. With Victor struggling in the water nearby, the bear hauled itself partially into the boat and struck Daniel with its left paw, knocking him unconscious and sending him over the opposite side. Irina and Alina found themselves trapped in the boat's small cabin area, as the massive bear, now partially inside the vessel, began methodically destroying everything within reach. The animal seemed driven by an almost frantic hunger, tearing apart the cooler containing their catch and consuming the fish with desperate efficiency. Yuri Petrov later testified that he could hear Irina shouting for help and Alina screaming, but the bear's massive bulk blocked most of his view of what was happening inside the boat. He attempted to approach in his own vessel, but was forced to maintain a safe distance as the enraged animal continued its attack. The bear's rampage inside the confined space of the boat cabin lasted approximately 8 minutes. When Petrov was finally able to approach the scene, he found all 4 members of the fishing party had succumbed to their injuries. Victor and Daniel were found in the water nearby, while Irina and Alina were discovered inside the destroyed cabin. The bear had disappeared back into the forest by the time emergency responders arrived nearly 2 hours later. Petrov had used his satellite phone to contact authorities immediately after confirming there were no survivors, but the remote location made rapid response impossible. Regional wildlife officials later confirmed that the attack was consistent with the behavior of a severely malnourished bear driven to desperation by food scarcity. They issued immediate warnings to all recreational users of the waterways in Ussuri Krai, emphasizing that even activities typically considered safe, such as motorboat fishing, could become dangerous when bears were forced into unusual hunting behaviors by environmental pressures. The incident marked the first recorded case in the region of a brown bear attacking people in a motorboat, highlighting the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters when natural food sources become scarce.